Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pitts. Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. We're going to go first to a very old video actually. This is a full interview with ex-KGB Yuri Bezmenov, talking about the 4 stages of ideological subversion. This is from 1984. I remember Greg showed me this video, the excerpt from this video when we were in the battle bus in Ukraine. I was like, oh my goodness, this is absolutely brilliant. And I have subsequently forgot to share it with you time and time again until someone sent me an email the other day saying, you have to watch this video. I was like, yeah, I've seen it. And thanks for reminding me. So thanks for reminding me. I think it was Howard that sent me that. So I really appreciate that reminder. Now, I'm going to actually give you a bit of a synopsis Greg has done on his own video, because rather than go through 1 hour and 21 minutes of him talking, there's a lot of kind of biography and how it affects his views on Russia, etc., in that. We're going to go to what Greg has excerpted and put together, and it is super prescient, this stuff that the guy is talking about.
This leads me to Nostradamus. Right here, Yuri Bezmenov. I have no comments. Just listen. There are 4 stages of subversion. This is what he's going to share with you, and we'll close out. Subversion means to overthrow a government, or to overthrow a society, or to overthrow a situation.
Change its
direction. The 4 stages are demoralization. In the Russian, it's demoralizatsiya. Destabilization. In Russian, destabilizatsiya. Crisis, 3rd, which is krisis in Ruski, in Russian, and then normalization, which is normalizatsiya. Okay? That's it. You see Putler back there. You see the hammer and sickle. I'm going to stop talking because this guy's way better than me. Folks, I know we're going a little bit longer than an hour tonight, but you've got to give this man 6 minutes. Here you go.
Mr. Bezmenov was born in 1939 in a suburb of Moscow. He was the son of a high-ranking Soviet Army officer. He was educated in the elite schools inside the Soviet Union and became an expert in Indian culture and Indian languages. He had an outstanding career with Novosti, which was and still is, I should say, the press arm or the press agency of the Soviet Union. It turns out that this is also a front for the KGB. He escaped to the West in 1970 after becoming totally disgusted with the Soviet system, and he did this at great risk to his life. He certainly is one of the world's outstanding experts on the subject of Soviet propaganda and disinformation and active measures. Well, you spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB. Or
just to remind you, there's an absolutely stunningly good documentary that's available on Amazon Prime called Active Measures, and it is about how the Russians did that with Paul Manafort and people within the Trump campaign prior to the 2016 election, and it is the most information dense documentary I've ever seen in my life, and it's the sort of thing that leaves you reeling. That someone like that can even remotely get voted back in. Like I most of all would like people who are pro-Trump to watch Active Measures and then come out of that and see what your brain does, see how you try and justify that Trump is still okay, that all is good, considering how deeply involved with Russian active measures he and his campaign were and quite possibly still are. That's a real genuine challenge to people. I know there are people out there that are still really big on voting for Trump, but yeah, active measures is a serious thing.
Or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The demoralization...
So remember that this is arguably what is taking place now when you have Twitter acting as one of these facets, when you have social media, TikTok, being weaponized by not only the Russian government but the Chinese state as well, and they are forming the opinions of not just young people but now people up and down society.
The process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When
post-truth situation that we live in, post-truth reality that we live in, where like you can be convinced, and I often talk about the backfire effect, where if you hold very strongly to a position and someone gives you rational evidence against that position, you just often entrench even more in that original position. And it is such a challenge to get yourself out of that. And this is exactly what he's talking to at this point.
When a military boot crashes his balls, then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Bezmenov said, "Now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized." This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition, and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. Your leftists in United States, all these professors and all these beautiful civil rights defenders, they are instrumental in the process of the subversion only to destabilize the nation. When their job is completed, they are not needed anymore. They know too much. Some of them, when they get disillusioned, when they see that Marxist-Leninists come to power, obviously they get offended. They think that they will come to power. That will never happen, of course. They will be lined up against the wall and shot. But they may turn into the most bitter enemies of Marxist-Leninists when they come to power. And that's what happened in Nicaragua. You remember most of these former Marxist-Leninists were either put to prison or one of them split, and now he's working against Sandinistas. It happened in Grenada when Maurice Bishop was already a Marxist. He was executed by a new Marxist who was more Marxist than this Marxist. Same happened in Afghanistan when first there was Taraki, he was killed by Amin, then Amin was killed by Babrak Karmal with the help of KGB. Same happened in Bangladesh when Mujibur Rahman, very pro-Soviet leftist, was assassinated by his own Marxist-Leninist military comrades. It's the same pattern everywhere. The time bomb is ticking with every second. The disaster.
So there you have it, guys. First time I've ever seen it. I don't know how I never discovered that in the past, but it's spot on. And just a couple of things and we'll get out of here. That was 1984, as you could tell by the Walter Mondale. Secondly, he was speaking to the United States, but I would now say forget that. That is speaking to the world. It's easy to see. Just think about these three things. We have an abundance of information, but not able to draw a logical conclusion. Spot on. And we're talking about the war in Ukraine here. He then said, we can take all of the docks, all the pics. I can take you by force, he said, to the concentration camps in the Soviet Union, and you still will not believe. I have told you guys so many times, I travel a lot, and people I've known for decades come up to me and say, Greg, we know that you're in Ukraine. We know that you go to the front lines. We know that you stream. We know that you speak the language. We know that you've got friends in the government. We know that you've got friends in the military. But on this one, you're wrong, because I saw it on Twitter. Zelensky is a criminal. I hear that all the time. It's exactly what he said. I could take them there and they would still say, no, this is not right. They're gone. They're out.
And I've talked to you previously about cognitive dissonance reduction, which is core belief, evidence against that belief. What happens? How do I reduce this dissonance? And I will almost invariably keep that core belief and somehow get rid of the evidence. And that's exactly what Greg is actually talking about there. It's like, yeah, you can present me all that evidence, but that evidence is wrong. It's just, this has to say, so there's something about that evidence. I can either just dismiss it out of hand. Some people are good can do that easily. I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd have to deal with that. I can't just dismiss it. But some people bury their heads in their sands, dismiss it, whatever, you're wrong. Or you shoot the messenger, or you use whatever other mechanism, poison the well, or whatever, get rid of that evidence or adapt it some way to your core beliefs, such that you're distorting the evidence in a way that it can fit with your core belief rather than go against it. And that's what people do.
Absolutely gone. And then the last statement, he said the same thing that Vladimir Putin said regarding Ukraine. When the tanks rolled into Czech, the dictator said, we're here to take care of our brothers. We're now brothers. It is the exact same words that Vladimir Putin stated at the beginning of this phase of the war. Upon invading Ukraine, we're there to take care of our brothers.
In other words, this whole Ukrainian invasion is part of that influence project, that influence, protocol of the Russians there that stretches back into the Soviet times of the Soviet Union. Right, we're then going to add that together with, and it's funny that he's mentioned Adam Curtis here. So this is a Vacnik suit from Pekka Kaluniemi talking about post-truth, which is kind of what I just mentioned there. But he said, so In today's Vatnik Soup, I'll talk to you about post-truth politics and how they have changed our society, in my opinion, far worse. This analysis relies heavily on the work done by academic John Hartley and by journalist Adam Curtis. Now, if you look at Adam Curtis, goodness me, one of his documentaries is called Hypernormalization. In fact, let's see on iPlayer. So Hypernormalization, there, we just heard that normalization was one of them. Bitter Lake, absolutely brilliant. What's my favorite one is The Power of Nightmares. Power of Nightmares there. A lot of it is talking about how society or reality is really complex. And because we're not very good at dealing with complexity, I often talk about that with nuance. We simplify things into good and bad, or to this and that. And The Power of Nightmares is a really good example of how after 9/11, the US barreled into, say, Afghanistan. And it's the idea that, well, it's looking at the history of how that all came to be, but also how we just simplified things into good and bad, and actually we did a bad job therefore of understanding the nuance of, say, Afghanistan and these other areas of the world, and the kind of good and evil thing just doesn't. I talked about this in my video earlier about understanding the US does have capitalistic imperialistic intentions and has done bad things, but also does really good things, and the EU likewise. And so no one's perfect, but there are some that are better than others. So I'd much rather that whole setup than the Russian-Chinese kind of axis, rather than go, everything about the US and the EU and UK is amazing. We're all just brilliant. We're perfect. And they're all completely evil. Actually, there's a lot of nuance going on there. And we have to kind of pick our way through and understand that that probably wasn't the best way of doing things. But actually, I generally support the ideals that you sort of mainly have, with a whole load of caveats. Anyway, let's go back to Pekka Kaluniemi here, who is talking about the post-truth. And I think this is really, really important to talk about. Post-truth politics refers to a political culture where the distinction between what's true and what's false has become almost irrelevant. This has created a political culture where, instead of stating facts, the debaters appeal to the audience's emotions. Remember, I talk an awful lot about epistemic security. So where we have cybersecurity and national security, we know what they mean. Epistemic security, epistemology is study of knowledge and truth. We don't know what's true and false anymore. And in fact, we know that falsehoods travel 6 times faster on social media than truth. And that's a real challenge for us all, because it means in order to defend truth, we have to fight harder and more often than we should do. And it's really, really frustrating. Of course, there was nothing new in politicians lying to people. He said this back in April last year. That's just called politics. But at some point, the people stopped caring about the factuality of these claims and focused more on how it made them feel. So emotions become more important than actual truth. So the sort of video he's referring to here.
People's darkest fears, pushing them. And
this is Adam Curtis speaking. So on and so forth. You get the point, is that, and I've talked about this before, your politics gets mixed up with your identity, and your identity, the politicians as well are mixed up in that. So your identity becomes, so say if you really like Trump, Trump becomes part of you. It all gets melded together, that sense of identity. So if someone attacks Trump, they aren't just attacking Trump, they're attacking you. And therefore you feel threatened. It's exactly what's going on there. It's really interesting. I haven't played that clip before. In fact, I haven't read this thread at all, but I just know it's going to be, hopefully I trust it to be good. And so all of this will be new to me. But that's perfectly encapsulates the sense of that it's about the feels and the emotions. Here's some guy who's stacked up. Who's I would assume, the way that he's well built, that he's could be fairly aggressive anyway, but you're attacking rather than sitting down and having an intellectual conversation. That's the kind of thing I would like to do. This is like you've attacked someone that I rate. You haven't attacked me, but you've attacked my politician. I'm standing here with a placard holding to as a sense of, you know, kind of not virtue signaling, but like this is who I'm supporting. This is my kind of cult or whatever. Oh right, now you've attacked him. Like, let's have a fight. This goes deeper than an intellectual conversation. You're attacking me. Bring it on. Bring it on. Nowadays, when talking about post-truth politics, it is usually in connection with the 2016 US presidential election and with the Brexit referendum in 2016. 2016 was actually the year when the word post-truth was added to the Oxford Dictionary. And there's a little infographic there. We've got troll factories. We're going to be talking a little bit about that kind of approach. So it's also closely connected to the social media networks that enabled fast, large-scale distribution of propaganda and disinformation, a system that was weaponized by the Kremlin and their firehose of falsehood approach. That's a term, firehose of falsehood. So let's look at that. Firehose of falsehood, the Russian style of propaganda for an age of information abundance. High volume and multi-channel approach. It's everywhere, and there's lots of it in those places. You look at Twitter, bloody everyone, blue ticks, absolutely swamping threads with their pro-whatever approach. Shameless in its willingness to broadcast lies. So obvious, it's got to be, surely, I mean, it's got to be true if they're that brazen with it. No, just shameless. I'm going to lie. And there's so much of it. There's something in psychology called the mere exposure effect, which is the more you hear something, the more credible it becomes. That's how advertising works. I talked about this many times before. So you hear Coke, 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 Coke. Oh, what drink shall I have? Oh, Coke, because I've just heard it so many times. There was talk in 2016, really good, and I'm not trying to be anti-Brexit or pro-Brexit, but the simple truth was Nigel Farage, who was who represented Leave, was on TV all the time. And this is actually same for Trump. Trump is so good at marketing himself, because even when he's on TV for bad things, he's on TV. So that whole trial and the conviction, he manipulated himself to talk outside the courtroom in a way that no one has ever been allowed to do previously. So when he says it was rigged, it's rigged, and then, you know, it's rigged by Biden, yet how can Biden rig that court case when his own son is in court right now and is under a Trump-appointed judge and is possibly going to go down, and he's not rigging that? So, but he's not rigged his own son, but he's rigged Trump. Okay, right. So I'm sure it is. Anyway, you get this whole situation where he then goes and talks to the media after every day in court. And this is part of the mere exposure effect. So it's not only that he's there all the time, but what he says, the more you say something, the more credible it becomes. This is a kind of way of moving the Overton window. The Overton window is like this window of what's acceptable to talk about. But if you kind of inch into it, so before we could never talk about like calling immigrants murderers and rapists, but you start inching away, saying it more and more around the sides, that the window moves, and suddenly these sort of things become acceptable because they then get talked about more and more, to the point where it's definitely acceptable to talk about these ideas. So with someone like Trump, he's just a master at placing himself on television. He can say good things or bad things, and it doesn't matter because it's just him saying them. And if everyone talks about him, everyone goes, "Oh, look at this terrible thing he said," you're giving him the oxygen. Now, I'm just as victim to that, or just as responsible for doing that, because he says things that are egregious. But of course, that gets him on TV, and it's a mere exposure effect. If you're merely exposed to something all the time, you normalize it. We go back to this kind of hyper-normalization. You normalize it, and then it becomes more credible and more acceptable. I talked about this in one of my books, oddly. It's on like biblical exegesis, but it's like the idea that you talk about it more and more, it becomes kind of credible. You do something. I'm going to say something really controversial now, but when you live inside a thing that you're a part of, so say transubstantiation with the Catholic belief system, where you are eating a wafer and you're drinking wine, and it literally turns into the flesh and the blood of Christ, right? Like, if you're from outside of that and you look in there, like you'd never heard that before, you'd be like, what the hell? That's cannibalism. What the kind of nuts thing is that? But because you're in it, and because you've been doing it since the age of squat up to whatever you are, 30 years of going to communion and doing that, it's like totally normalized. There's nothing weird about that. And that's kind of the same. Like, you move that window and you're just living it the whole time. You're hearing it the whole time. It doesn't become bonkers. It's not bonkers. It's just, well, it's normalized, right? Anyway, I digress. And I'm not trying to be anti-Catholic or anything there. It's just like the whole principle of transubstantiation, I think, is a really good example of something that if you saw from another religion outside, there's something called the outsider test for faith by John Loftus, which is if you take yourself outside of your own faith and then try and look at your faith from the eyes of people from outside it, you'll end up being more critical to it in a way that you should be, but you're not because you're inside your faith. And we should always take ourselves outside of our positions and look at what we're saying and critique ourselves as an outsider. And that will give us a much better, more robust, I guess, justification. If our beliefs can survive that, then we'll be more justified in holding to them. But anyway, I digress. No commitment to or requirement for consistency. So you can say things that are mutually exclusive, but you kind of like, my answer to that is this. Oh, my answer to that is this. But actually, these two things can't go together. It doesn't matter because I've answered that and I've answered that. And there's this kind of like lack of consistency and coherence. Rapid, continuous and repetitive messaging. Point is not to persuade, but to confuse and overwhelm. There's a really good example of this. Rapid, continuous and repetitive messaging. There was a public debate between Rishi Sunak, the outgoing Prime Minister, the present Prime Minister, and Keir Starmer last night on ITV. And Rishi Sunak got in this thing and he kept saying it, and Starmer didn't put it down because of the Brandolini's law. Right, the thing was, if Labour get in, there's going to be a £2,000 increase to your taxes. And this is actually, and he kind of sold that as like, that's what the Treasury have said. But the reality was, it wasn't the Treasury. In fact, the Treasury denied it today, and it was said by conservative think tank people, or SPADs, or whoever it was that then said, this is what you say. He said it so many times that it's now become this thing. Oh, the Labour are going to cost you £2,000. And the reason he couldn't answer it is because answering it was really complex. And he was only given 45 seconds each person was given 45 seconds to answer the question. The format was terrible last night. And then you had like a bunch of seconds to answer it in a rebuttal. So you had no time to do anything. And just to explain where those stats came from and how you actually construct those stats and how it was garbage in, garbage out, and you need to rechange that and do that, and they're assuming this, you don't have the time. And of course that's too bad for Starmer, because rapid, continuous and repetitive messaging gets that point across. And then you watch that debate last night, you say, well, Sunak had a really good point that, oh my God, but it's going to cost us £2,000 extra a year if we vote for Labour. And of course it's not true, but it sounds like it is. Point is not to persuade, but to confuse and overwhelm. Assumes a low trust environment and lowers it further. So no one trusts each other, so we're going to shove loads of often mutually exclusive ideas out there. This is what the Russians do, don't they, with their own propaganda. They throw all these ideas out there, see what hits, but ostensibly you're going to confuse the audience and then say, the only people who can solve that is us. So you confuse and overwhelm people, throw it all out there, and you guys don't believe much already. You're not very trustworthy. Sorry, it's not you don't believe. You don't trust institutions and people much already. Well, now we're going to lower the bar even further so that you really don't trust anyone. And we'll say we're the only ones that you can trust, and we're the knights in shining armour here. Number of arguments matters more than their quality. A scattergun approach, and drown out competing messages through sheer volume. And that's how Twitter works. There you go. Just fascinating. But the post-truth society had been reality in the USSR for decades. By the mid-1980s, there was no connection between the USSR's leadership propaganda and the everyday life the common folk lived. The Soviet Union had become a society where no one believed in anything. With the words of Adam Curtis, quote, the Soviet Union became a society where everyone knew what their leaders said was not real because they could see it with their own eyes, that the economy was falling apart. But the Soviet Union made everyone play along and pretend. that it was real, because nobody could come up with any alternative. The Russians and the Soviets even had a word for these transparent lies, Varanyo, and we've talked about that before, how the BS goes up the hierarchy in the context of the military. It dates back to the Mongol rule, when violence and lying was a way to survive under their harsh rule. Journalist and author Elena Gorokova defined Varanyo as follows: someone lies to us, we know that they're lying, they know that we know, and they keep on lying anyway while we pretend we believe them. Varanyo, a tactical lie, has been used constantly by the Kremlin during the Russo-Ukrainian war and will be used in the future too. Russian casualties, Skripal and Navalny poisonings, Ukrainian Nazis, bioweapons labs in Ukraine. We all know that these are lies, but some pretend otherwise. In Russia, truth has shades of grey, whereas in the West, we think more in black and white. And that's kind of what Adam Curtis talks about in his simplification of these narratives, whereas actually the Russians understand possibly better than us, and they therefore manipulate that. Here, what you're seeing on screen at the moment, the two people that poisoned Skripal came over to Salisbury, obviously poisoned him, stayed for a day, they were caught on CCTV, blah, 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 and then they came back here and they wheeled out. Interestingly, they're being interviewed at the moment by Margarita Simonyan, who actually doesn't really believe them. This is before she became who she is now. But they came out with the Wikipedia description. So, we went to Salisbury because the wonderful cathedral that's a spire that's 138 meters high, or whatever it is, they claim. And they just spilled it, came out that spiel. And you're like, no one would ever say that. Two blokes of your age who appear to be in the KGB, FSB, are not going to Salisbury to visit the cathedral for a day and then return to Russia after being seen very close to Skripal's house. Anyway, something is either true or false. That's how we believe things. Again, Russians use these shades of grey against us and their Firehose of falsehood approach of online propaganda. But the US and the security services also came up with their own system of utilising half-truths: perception management. Perception management focuses on creating, quote, desired reality, where some facts are taken into account and others are ignored. This strategy was used by Reagan administration against Muammar Gaddafi in the mid-1980s and by the Bush administration against Saddam Hussein in 2003. With a perception management, the authorities could create dramatic stories that grabbed people's attention but often had little to do with reality itself. Then in June 2015, starting his presidential campaign, Donald Trump and his campaign workers weaponized the post-truth politics on a whole new level in the US. Of course, his pathological lying had started long before, going back to his real estate days starting in the 70s. In a sense, Trump was the perfect candidate for Russia to support, as he was the epitome of Varanyo. Journalist Susanne Mulachi stated that he was full of crap 90% of the time. Trump's organization executive vice president Barbara Ress said that after a while, no one believed a single word he would say. After becoming the president, Trump's lying became so common that the Washington Post started tracking the factuality of his statements with their fact-checking department. I think it was over 30,573 in 4 years. By January 2021, Trump had lied over 30,000 times during his term as president. The amount is approximately 21 lies per day. This lying continued after the 2020 US presidential election, when Trump and his gang tried to overturn the election results in his favor. Now, I know this will seem very anti-Trump to you guys, but this is how people abroad see Trump, and especially when you understand his connections with Russia and Manafort, which we'll come on to in a second. Many journalists and academics refer to this because I've just seen it, strategy as the big lie propaganda technique. The term was coined by Hitler for a lie so big that no one dared to dispute it. Even though it was somewhat novel technique in the US, it had been used in Russia and the USSR for decades. As the Russians and Mr. Trump have shown, social media is a powerful tool for propagating tactical lies. In their 2018 study, Vasawi et al. Showed that fake news spread 6 times faster than truthful news, and that's actually, I think, been replicated as well, and that's what I was referring to earlier. The study also excludes the use of automated lies, so it excludes them, automated bots, which probably increase and multiply it even further. Social media companies have been criticized for this, and platforms like Facebook have launched their own fact-checking services to decrease the spread of disinformation. Of course, Twitter got rid of that or X, when Elon Musk took over. So, there you go. He got rid of his moderators, or half the moderating team, possibly all of them. I don't know. It's all very controversial. Elon has taken a different approach with Twitter. He's called for a more balanced approach, with some call the marketplace of ideas. The idea with this approach is that the truth will eventually emerge from the competition of ideas in free and transparent public debate. The problem with that is that not everyone is able to decipher the truth from falsehood, and so therefore it will still prey on an awful lot of people, and the time it takes for the truth to come out. So say you've got a falsehood that circulates, and then the truth eventually comes out, well, it's 6 times slower, isn't it? But in terms of dominance, it might either never do that, or you're relying on people to individually work out the truth. So you say, yeah, the truth will out, but actually there's an awful lot of people that still don't believe the truth. But even if it did become mainstream, the time it's taken to do that is the damage. The damage done in that time to people and their belief systems is huge. And this is why you do have to have some kind of moderation. Like, the marketplace of ideas approach is ripe. It's just such fertile ground for manipulation. And Russia know that, and they take advantage of it with troll and bot farms. Just not cool. So far, this balancing act has so far resulted in I don't know why that's not coming back out. In the reinstatement of various prominent and literal neo-Nazi and other accounts with extreme views, and in the departure of both NPR and PBS. So these public broadcasters have said, no, we can't handle that here at Twitter. And all this for just $8 a month. So it's kind of, Pekka Kaluniemi is linking post-truth in with social media there, and with the Firehose of falsehood approach, and the ideas that we heard about from Yuri Bezmenov. Fascinating stuff there. So much more I could say, and so much more I have said about this previously, but we just need to be very wary of disinformation. It's a constant fight against it, isn't it? Right, where are we for time? Goodness me, that's taken an awful long time for me to go through that. Let's do a very quick long thread on Georgia and Georgian dreams. Okay. Since 2012, Georgian Dream, led by billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, has been accused of using undemocratic tactics to stay in power. With the October 2024 elections approaching, their manipulative strategies are in full swing. Here's how they're doing it. So first, Georgian Dream and Bidzina Ivanishvili know that if they do not retain power after the election in October, they will be in serious trouble. I've talked about that recently a lot. Ivanishvili has already mentioned the fate of Ukraine's Viktor Yanukovych and doesn't want to be the next Yanukovych. Their actions and willingness to exercise extreme power must be seen in this light. For them, the thought of losing is terrifying. They are desperate, and they use all means to ensure that the opposition loses. So with the administration control over the administration, amendments to the election code supposedly aligning with the EU standards are concerning. The new process for appointing the Central Election Commission chair and members lacks transparency, keeping control in Georgian Dream's hands. That's the CEC. So the CEC appointments, the restructuring of the CEC allows a ruling party to exert influence over appointments. Critics argue this leads to a biased election administration, ensuring decisions favouring Georgian Dream. A lack of transparency and inclusiveness. Opposition parties and civil society were largely excluded from drafting these amendments. This exclusion isn't just an oversight, it's a deliberate attempt to stifle dissent and keep control. Media and civil society clampdown, introducing laws like the Foreign Agents Law, modelled after Russia's, to suppress NGOs and media. This is a clear move to silence critics and opposition voices, reducing their ability to mobilise and inform the public. Manipulation of electoral processes. Georgian Dream has a history of fraud, from voter intimidation to ballot stuffing. The 2020 elections were marred by such irregularities. Expect more of the same in 2024. Gerrymandering and voter suppression. Georgian Dream has manipulated district boundaries to dilute opposition support. In regions where opposition parties have strong backing, redistricting has split these areas to weaken the voting power. Goodness me, there's some parallels to the US that I could talk about here that I think are exceptionally scary and show democratic backsliding even there. reducing opposition turnout. Tactics like closing polling stations, oh my goodness, other parallels, in opposition strongholds or scheduling elections on inconvenient dates aim to reduce voter turnout where opposition support is high. This undermines the democratic process and skews results. Specific examples: in the 2020 elections, polling stations in opposition heavy areas like Zugdidi and Kutaisi faced logistical issues from closures. Reducing voter access, such measures are designed to frustrate and disenfranchise opposition voters. Diaspora voters. Georgian Dream has made it difficult for diaspora voters to participate, limiting polling stations. Bureaucratic hurdles and misinformation campaigns all serve to disenfranchise Georgians abroad who might vote against them. Limited polling stations. In 2020 elections, there were very few polling stations abroad, especially in countries with large Georgian communities. This was no accident. It's a calculated move to reduce opposition voters. Security concerns and intimidation. Diaspora voters have reported intimidation and pressure, particularly those vocal about their opposition to Georgian Dream. This includes threats against their families back in Georgia. Manipulation of overseas voting counting. The vote counting process abroad is often opaque, leading to accusations of tampering. Ensuring transparency in counting is critical, but Georgian Dream seems to prefer the shadows. Rigging. The combination of these tactics illustrates a concerted effort by Georgian Dream and Bezmenov Ivanishvili to manipulate the electoral system. Understanding these strategies is crucial for advocating fair and transparent elections in Georgia this October. State media propaganda. State-run media frequently broadcast biased content supporting Georgian Dream while discrediting opposition. The propaganda machine shapes public opinion and diminishes fair electoral competition. Civil society resistance. NGOs and civil society groups are tirelessly working to expose these tactics and demand fair elections. Their efforts are crucial for maintaining democratic integrity. This is a main motivation for Georgian Dream and Ivanishvili to implement the Russian law. Impact on youth. Young Georgians eager for EU integration and democratic reforms are particularly disillusioned by these tactics. Many are actively protesting and advocating for fair elections. They are still the hope to change this October. Historical context. Georgian Dream has a track record of electoral manipulation. Past elections have seen similar tactics, and the 2024 elections are set to continue this pattern. Their dominance in social media, disinformation, add to this kind of what we've just been talking about. Spreading the word is essential to raise awareness about these issues. Share this thread to inform others about the critical situation in Georgia and a fight for democracy. Stay informed and act. The future of Georgia's democracy depends on informed citizens and international support. Let's stand together for fair and transparent elections. Absolutely, and this is kind of what I'm about, which is fighting for truth. We are fighting against pro-Russian party with unlimited resources, and that has corrupted an entire country, and a pro-Russian oligarch who has everything to lose. They will use any means, legal, treasonous, and violent, to ensure victory in October. We have to stop them. And in fact, we're going to do a Vatnik soup, another one, on Ivanishvili, the Georgian politician and oligarch. He's best known launching the pro-Kremlin Georgian Dream Party and for running the government from behind the scenes, slowly shifting Georgia's course from the west back to Russia. So, of course, you've got to remember that Georgia Georgian Dream started as a pro-EU party, but has got into power and then shifted its course to trajectory towards Russia. Ivanishvili was born and raised in a small village of Georgia. Their family was poor, but he showed a business mindset from a young age. In 1988, he moved to Moscow and began his first business importing and selling computers with Vitaly Malkin, a Russian-Israeli oligarch. The rapid growth of Ivanishvili's business can be attributed to his close ties with government officials. In 1996, he joined the Seven Bankers, a group of influential Russian bankers who supported Boris Yeltsin's re-election. He financed Lebed, a presidential candidate designed to siphon votes from the communists and secure Yeltsin's election. Lebed's subsequent appointment as governor of Krasnoyarsk opened the door for Ivanishvili to engage in extremely shady business deals in that region. Later, Ivanishvili became a major shareholder of Gazprom, but claimed in a 2011 interview he sold his entire stake at 100% profit. Nevertheless, in 2018, former Georgian President Saakashvili alleged that Ivanishvili still held a major stake there. In 2002, Ivanishvili left Russia, first moving to France and then returning to There's quite a diaspora community of Georgians in France, I think. There's a lot of Georgians who play rugby in France. I don't know if there's a connection. Anyway, he maintained an extremely secretive profile until he entered politics in 2011, when he founded the Georgian Dream Party. That year, few Georgians even knew what he looked like. Despite avoiding public appearances, Ivanishvili's team facilitated rumours of his philanthropy. He built a large Holy Trinity Orthodox church and provided monthly stipends to notable figures in sports and arts, leveraging their support later to propel the electoral victory. Speculate to accumulate return on investment. Ivanishvili entered politics in 2011 with an open letter criticising Saakashvili's autocratic governance and worsening relations with Russia. He promised to steer Georgia toward NATO and EU membership while stabilising ties with Russia and boosting the economy. Talking out of both sides of his mouth there, claiming that he's going to be pro-EU and pro-NATO, but the reality is he was wanting to move more towards the sphere of influence of Russia. Ivanishvili and his team made promises that now seem outlandish, such as investing $1 billion in agriculture and each of Georgia's 6,000 plus villages getting $5 million US. The latter promise was promoted by former Soviet actress Sopiko Chiaurelli. Ivanishvili himself promised to rebuild democracy that would shock the West and Europe, and to treat political opponents with dignity. This claim now seems the most absurd given the numerous political opponents who have been arrested, persecuted and physically assaulted. I mean, it is, clearly that's not very true at all. Since taking power, Ivanishvili has pursued politically motivated persecution of his opponents. So far, he's imprisoned several opposition members, including former president of Georgia, Mikhail Saakashvili, and other ministers from his party. Now, this is a guy who's in prison and is being slowly poisoned in prison and is not thought to be long for this world, sadly. It's absolutely terrible. But yeah, Georgian Dream, that's what they're like. As a tradition, Ivanishvili Ivanishvili took over Georgia's largest media corporations, turning formerly critical media outlets into pro-government ones. Later, he also arrested the former CEO of TV broadcast Nika Gvaramia. Typical authoritarian activity, isn't it? In one of his interviews, Ivanishvili remarked that even though he's actually not in power himself, but he's the brains and the force behind it. Ivanishvili remarked that the worst thing to happen to Georgians was the opening of borders with EU countries. He explained that seeing how well Europeans live made Georgians less content with their own lives and more desperate. Ivanishvili's formally left all political positions in 2013, but continues to be seen as a shadow ruler of Georgian politics. So he did have a political position, but no longer does. To this day, high-level officials regularly visit Ivanishvili in his glass palace located in the mountains overlooking Tbilisi. All close to him got lucrative positions. His personal assistant became the prime minister, his chief bodyguard, the Minister of Interior Affairs, and his second bodyguard took over the state protection. He even made his personal dentist the Minister of Healthcare. Throughout the years, Ivanishvili and his family faced multiple scandals, especially his rapper son Bera. A leaked audio captured Bera ordering the head of Special State Protection Service to intimidate teenagers who insulted him online. Another leaked phone call audio emerged from March 2022 when Russians were already killing Ukrainians in Bucha, Kherson and Mariupol. Ivanishvili was talking with Russian oligarch Yevtushenkov, discussing the ways to help him avoid sanctions. Although there were always indications that Ivanishvili's government I hate the way it does that. Even Israel's government leaned towards Russia rather than Europe. This became most evident when the Russian-Ukrainian war started. Ivanishvili's government did not join sanctions against Russia and even blocked planes meant to transport Georgian volunteers to fight for Ukraine. This stance led to protests on Georgia's streets, prompting President Zelensky to label the Georgian government's actions as shameful when addressing protesters in front of the parliament building of Georgia. But the largest protests erupted when the government reintroduced a contentious Russian law, which labels NGOs and media organizations receiving Western funding as foreign agents, a term considered extremely derogatory in Georgia. Hundreds of thousands took to the streets in opposition to the bill, and we've seen lots of footage of that. Similar bills introduction in Russia led to the shutdown of numerous NGOs and TV channels, showcasing potentially repressive impact. Of course, you can say the same of other countries. It's just, I think, being passed in Kazakhstan. We've had it passed in Hungary, I believe. Essentially, it grants Ivanishvili's government the power to target and potentially shut down any NGOs or media outlets that don't align with their agenda. Alongside the controversial Russian law, Ivanishvili introduced the offshore law, enabling the tax-free repatriation of his offshore wealth. Some have speculated that Ivanishvili is preparing for potential Western sanctions by consolidating his capital in Georgia, restricting NGOs' access to Western funds, and becoming the primary funding source within the country. In his latest speech from April 2024, he publicly denounced the West as the global war party, blaming it for deteriorating relations between Georgia, Ukraine and Russia. He attributed the conflicts in Ukraine and Georgia's 2008 war with Russia to Western actions. Of course he does. And also criticised the West for abandoning traditional values. I mean, it sounds like Putin 2.0 and Orban 2.0, doesn't it? For almost a month, Georgian youth have been protesting the reintroduction of this bill, viewing it as Bezmenov Ivanishvili's final step to cementing his rule as an ultimate dictator. And of course, you know, they have failed. It has got through, even though it was vetoed. It was eventually overruled, that veto. But it's all going to come down to the elections. And as I said to you before, either Georgia Dream double down, rig the elections and get really harsh on everyone, or they about face change and say, okay, we're cool with you guys. We'll redirect our attention towards the EU and NATO. Likelihood of the latter is it's just very improbable. So much more likely they're going to double down, get violent, rig the elections and turn Georgia more towards Russia and more into a dictatorship. And that's enough from me today. And I'm sure, you know, you can see Georgia, no doubt, using some of the techniques we talked about through the first half of the video as they try and manipulate their electorate and their audiences with post-truth realities, which are not really realities, unfortunately. Well, they are. Unfortunately, it's all about perception, isn't it? Perception is reality. And quite often our perceptions are wayward because we are human beings and we are very easily manipulated. Just be aware of that. Try and take yourself out of your position. I'm a sort of centre-left liberal, although it might sound like I'm advocating, you know, war. I'm not. I'm advocating defence, and I'm advocating the defeat of an aggressor who is morally in the wrong. But often I need to more often take myself out of my political position to critique it from outside and see what I would look like from the outside and try and get an understanding of my own. You know, the easiest person to fool is yourself, as Richard Feynman once said. We need to be most alert to ourselves being fooled. As much as, we can talk about how everyone else is fooled and we're always right, or how do we know that we're right? We should be questioning ourselves all the time. Anyway, thanks for listening. Take care. Speak soon.